Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez adjusted her scope for the 100th time that morning, knowing the other soldiers were watching her every move. She could feel their eyes boring into her back as she lay prone on the rocky outcrop, studying the distant compound through her rifle's optics. The whispers had been getting louder over the past 3 weeks since she'd been assigned to Bravo Team. "She's good at the range, but this isn't the range," Corporal Davidson had said just yesterday, loud enough for half the forward operating base to hear. "When the real pressure hits, when lives are on the line, we'll see what she's really made of." Elena had heard worse. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she'd learned early that proving yourself meant letting your actions speak louder than your words. Her father, a Marine veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. By 16, she was outperforming grown men at the local shooting competitions. By 18, she'd enlisted and set her sights on becoming one of the Army's elite snipers. The path hadn't been easy. The physical training had pushed her body to its limits. The mental conditioning had been even harder. But Elena had something that couldn't be taught in any military school: an unshakable calm under pressure and a natural eye for reading wind, distance, and timing that even her instructors called exceptional. Now, 3 years later, and fresh out of sniper school, she found herself in the mountains of Afghanistan, part of a specialized team tasked with reconnaissance and elimination of high-value targets. The problem was that most of her teammates still saw her as an unknown quantity. She was the first woman assigned to their unit, and despite her impressive scores and recommendations, many of them remained skeptical. "Movement in Sector 7, came the voice of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison through her earpiece. Harrison was the team leader, a 20-year veteran who had initially opposed having Elena assigned to his squad. He'd made his feelings clear during her first briefing. He didn't care about politics or proving points. He cared about mission success and bringing his soldiers home alive. Elena shifted her rifle slightly, scanning the area Harrison had indicated. Through her scope, she could see figures moving between the buildings of a small village nestled in the valley below. Intelligence suggested that a Taliban commander named Rashid Kamar had been using the village as a staging area for attacks on coalition forces. For the past month, his group had been responsible for multiple IED attacks and ambushes that had claimed the lives of 17 American soldiers. "I count 6 armed individuals," Elena reported, her voice steady and professional. 3 near the central building, 2 on patrol, 1 manning what appears to be a PKM machine gun nest on the eastern perimeter. "Copy that," Harrison replied. "Can you get a positive ID on our primary target?" Elena had studied Kamar's photograph for hours. The man was in his late 30s, with distinctive facial scarring from a drone strike 2 years earlier. He was known for his tactical intelligence and had a reputation for being extremely cautious. Getting close enough for a traditional assault would be nearly impossible. His compound was positioned in a way that provided excellent defensive advantages and multiple escape routes. "Negative on primary target," Elena reported after several minutes of careful observation. "But I'm seeing increased activity. They might be preparing to move." The intel had been clear. Kamar was planning something big. Intercepted communications suggested he was coordinating with other Taliban cells for a major offensive that could destabilize the entire region. The window for capturing or eliminating him was closing rapidly. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the team's spotter and Elena's partner for this mission, crawled up beside her. Rodriguez was a 12-year veteran who had initially been openly skeptical about working with a female sniper. However, over the past few weeks, Elena's professionalism and skill had begun to earn his grudging respect. "What's your assessment?" Rodriguez asked, settling in beside her with his own optics. "The compound is well defended," Elena replied, not taking her eye off the scope. "Natural choke points, elevated firing positions, clear fields of fire in all directions. Any direct approach would result in significant casualties." Rodriguez nodded. This had been the problem that had stumped military planners for weeks. Kamar had chosen his location well. The village was built into a series of terraced hillsides, with narrow pathways that could easily be defended by a small force. Artillery strikes were out of the question due to civilian presence, and airstrikes would likely allow Kamar to escape through a network of caves and tunnels that intelligence believed extended throughout the mountain. "Command is getting impatient," Rodriguez said quietly. "Word is they're considering a full-scale assault despite the risks." Elena understood the pressure. Every day Kamar remained operational meant more American lives at risk. But she also understood that a hasty assault on such a well-defended position could result in catastrophic losses. There had to be a better way. "What's the maximum effective range from our current position to the compound?" she asked. Rodriguez consulted his rangefinder and calculations. "Approximately 3,400 meters. Call it 2.1 miles. Elena felt something stir in her chest. It was an impossible distance for most snipers. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history had been just over 2,200 meters. What she was considering would require not just exceptional skill, but perfect conditions and a significant amount of luck. "You're not seriously considering," Rodriguez began, reading the expression on her face. "The physics are possible," Elena said, her mind already running calculations. "With the right ammunition, accounting for wind, drift, bullet drop, even the Earth's rotation at this distance, it's mathematically feasible." "Feasible and possible are two different things," Rodriguez replied. "Elena, that shot would be legendary if it connected. But if it misses, we blow our position and Kamar disappears forever." Elena knew he was right. A missed shot at that distance would send a clear message to the Taliban that American forces were operating in the area. Kamar would vanish into the mountain caves, and months of intelligence work would be wasted. Worse, other American units in the region would lose the element of surprise for their own operations. But as she continued to study the compound through her scope, Elena began to notice patterns. The sentries moved on predictable routes. The machine gun nest was positioned to cover the main approaches, but had limited visibility to the north. Most importantly, she spotted a balcony on the main building where a figure appeared periodically, always at the same time, always for approximately the same duration. "Rodriguez," she said quietly. "What time is it?" 14:30 hours. "There's someone who appears on that balcony every day at 14:45. Intelligence photos show Kamar has a habit of conducting daily briefings at that time." Rodriguez trained his spotting scope on the indicated location. "If that's him, and if he maintains his routine, then we might have a window," Elena finished. "One shot, one chance." The weight of the decision pressed down on both of them. Elena's reputation, her career, potentially the lives of countless soldiers and civilians, all of it could hinge on a single trigger pull at an almost impossible distance. "I need to make some calls," Rodriguez said, reaching for his radio. "This isn't a decision we can make alone." While Rodriguez moved away to contact command, Elena remained focused on the compound. She began making detailed observations of environmental conditions, wind direction and speed at various altitudes, humidity levels, barometric pressure, all factors that would affect a bullet's trajectory over such an extreme distance. The ammunition would need to be perfect. She'd brought specialized long-range rounds designed for maximum ballistic coefficient and consistency. Her rifle, a custom-modified M24 sniper weapon system, had been zeroed for extreme long-range shooting. She'd spent hundreds of hours practicing at distances that other snipers considered impossible, but this would be different. This wouldn't be shooting at a known range with controlled conditions. This would be a real-world shot with real-world consequences against a target who would appear for only a brief window of time. Elena thought about her father's words from years ago. "Mija, In life, you get moments where you have to choose between playing it safe and proving what you're really capable of. The safe choice keeps you comfortable, but the bold choice changes everything. Rodriguez returned with a grim expression. Command is interested, but they're also concerned about the risks. Colonel Henderson wants to speak with you directly. Elena accepted the radio handset, knowing that this conversation could determine not just the mission's outcome, but her entire military future. "This is Staff Sergeant Martinez," she said into the radio. "Sergeant Martinez," came the colonel's voice, crackling through the static. "I understand you're proposing an extremely long-range shot to eliminate our primary target." "Yes, sir. I believe it's our best option given the tactical situation." "Sergeant, what you're describing is beyond the range of any confirmed sniper kill in military history. Are you certain about your capabilities?" Elena took a deep breath. This was the moment where doubt usually crept in, where the weight of others' skepticism could shatter confidence. But as she looked through her scope at the distant compound, she felt only clarity. "Sir, I've trained for shots like this my entire career. The conditions are as good as we're likely to get. The target presents himself predictably. If I miss, we maintain position and fall back to alternative plans. If I connect, we eliminate a high-value target and save potentially dozens of American lives." There was a long pause on the radio. Elena could imagine the colonel weighing the options, considering the political and military ramifications of authorizing such an unprecedented shot. "Sergeant Martinez," the colonel finally said, "you have authorization to take the shot when opportunity presents itself. But understand, success or failure, this decision will define your military career." "Understood, sir." As Elena handed the radio back to Rodriguez, she felt the familiar calm settling over her. It was the same feeling she'd experienced during her most challenging training exercises, the same stillness that had carried her through every significant moment of her military career. "So we're really doing this," Rodriguez said, settling back into his spotter position. "We're really doing this." The next few minutes passed in focused preparation. Elena checked and rechecked her rifle, adjusting the scope's settings for the extreme range. Rodriguez gathered detailed environmental data, calling out wind speeds and directions at various altitudes. They synchronized their watches and confirmed communication protocols. At exactly 14:45, as Elena had predicted, a figure appeared on the distant balcony. Through her scope, she could make out the distinctive scarring that marked their target. Rashid Kamar stood in the afternoon sunlight, apparently conducting his daily briefing with several subordinates. "Target acquired," Elena whispered into her microphone. "Requesting final authorization." "You are cleared to engage," came Harrison's voice. "Take your time, Sergeant. Make it count." Elena settled into her shooting position, feeling her heartbeat slow and her breathing become controlled and rhythmic. At this distance, even the slightest movement could send the bullet wide by several feet. She had to account for wind drift, the Earth's rotation, the slight downward angle, and a dozen other variables that most snipers never had to consider. Through her scope, she could see Kamar clearly now. He was gesturing to his men, apparently giving instructions. Elena knew that in approximately 30 seconds, he would turn and disappear back into the building. This was her window. Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece with final environmental readings. Wind southeast at 12 knots, gusting to 15. Temperature 78 degrees. Humidity 45%. Range confirmed at 3,410 meters. Elena made her final adjustments, centering the crosshairs not on Kamar's current position, but on where he would be when the bullet arrived nearly 6 seconds after she pulled the trigger. The mathematics were complex, but her training had made the calculations instinctive. "Send it," Rodriguez whispered. Elena took a deep breath, released half of it, and began applying steady pressure to the trigger. The world around her seemed to narrow to just the view through her scope, the feel of the rifle against her shoulder, and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. As her finger continued its slow, steady squeeze, Elena thought about all the people who had doubted her, all the times she'd been told she wasn't strong enough, tough enough, or reliable enough for this kind of pressure. The trigger broke with a clean, crisp pull. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder, the sound bouncing off canyon walls and returning as a series of diminishing echoes. Elena remained perfectly still, watching through her scope as her bullet traveled its impossible arc across 2 miles of mountain air. 6 seconds felt like an eternity. The impact was unmistakable. Through her optics, Elena watched Rashid Kamar's body jerk backward before collapsing on the balcony. The other Taliban fighters scattered like startled birds, shouting in confusion and panic. They couldn't determine where the shot had originated. The distance was too great, the angle too unexpected. "Holy shit," Rodriguez breathed beside her, his voice filled with disbelief. "Elena, you just made military history." But Elena was already tracking her scope across the compound, watching for secondary targets and assessing the situation's development. Professional instinct kept her focused on the mission rather than celebrating the unprecedented achievement. "Target down," she reported calmly into her radio. "Compound showing signs of confusion and disorganization." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through the radio with barely contained excitement. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Martinez. Confirm target elimination and begin extraction procedures." What Elena couldn't have known in that moment was that her bullet had done more than eliminate a single Taliban commander. Rashid Kamar had been coordinating a complex network of insurgent cells across 3 provinces. His death would create a power vacuum that would take months for the Taliban to fill, disrupting planned operations that could have claimed hundreds of coalition lives. The team extracted successfully, and within hours, Elena found herself sitting in a debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman, facing a panel of senior officers who were struggling to process what had just occurred. "Sergeant Martinez," Colonel Henderson began, consulting his notes, "your shot has been confirmed by multiple intelligence sources as the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. The previous record was 2,250 meters. You exceeded that by over 1,100 meters. Elena nodded respectfully, but remained focused on the mission's broader implications. "Sir, what's the intelligence assessment of Kamar's network following his elimination?" "Preliminary reports suggest significant disruption of Taliban operations in the region. Your action likely prevented a coordinated offensive that was scheduled to begin within the week." Over the following days, Elena's reputation spread throughout the coalition forces in Afghanistan. The story of the impossible shot became legendary among soldiers, but it also attracted unwanted attention. Within a month, intelligence reports indicated that Taliban leadership had placed a substantial bounty on Elena's head, recognizing her as a significant threat to their operations. The military's response was swift and decisive. Elena was reassigned to a classified special operations unit tasked with the most challenging and dangerous missions in the theater. If the enemy wanted to make her a target, the military would ensure she had the resources and support necessary to continue eliminating high-value targets. It was during this reassignment that Elena first learned about a situation that would define the remainder of her deployment. A 6-month siege that had been draining coalition resources and morale. The briefing took place in a secure conference room at Bagram Airfield. Present were Colonel Henderson, several special operations commanders, and intelligence officers who had been tracking the situation for months. The subject was a Taliban stronghold in the mountains of Kunar province. "This is the Coast Valley compound," Colonel Henderson began, indicating a location on the tactical map. "Taliban forces have been using it as a headquarters for operations throughout the region. We've attempted to neutralize it 4 times over the past 6 months. Elena studied the aerial photographs and satellite imagery spread across the table. The compound was a natural fortress, built into a series of rocky outcrops and connected by tunnels that had been expanded over decades. Multiple defensive positions covered all approaches, and the location provided commanding views of the surrounding valleys. "Previous attempts?" Elena asked, examining the tactical assessments. "First attempt was a direct assault by Rangers, heavy casualties, mission failure. Second was a prolonged artillery bombardment followed by an assault. The tunnels protected the defenders, and they simply emerged after the bombardment to repel the attack. Third attempt was a special operations insertion via helicopter. They managed to reach the outer perimeter but couldn't penetrate the inner defenses." Major Thompson, the special operations commander, continued the briefing. "The fourth attempt was an extended siege operation. We cut off supply lines and attempted to starve them out. After 3 months, it became clear they had sufficient supplies and water to outlast us." Elena noticed something troubling in the photographs. "How many civilian casualties?" "None in the immediate compound," Colonel Henderson replied. "But the Taliban forces have been holding approximately 30 Afghan civilians as human shields, mostly women and children from nearby villages." The situation was becoming clear to Elena. This wasn't just a military target. It was a humanitarian crisis that had been festering for 6 months. Coalition forces were trapped in an impossible situation. They couldn't assault the compound without risking civilian casualties, but they couldn't abandon the siege without allowing the Taliban to continue using it as a base for operations. "What's the current tactical situation?" Elena asked. Major Thompson activated a digital display showing real-time intelligence. "We maintain observation posts at distances ranging from 800 to 1,200 meters. The Taliban forces number approximately 40 to 50 fighters, led by a commander named Malik Aziz. Aziz is arguably one of the most effective Taliban tactical leaders in the region." Elena had heard of Aziz. Intelligence reports described him as a former Afghan army officer who had defected to the Taliban after becoming disillusioned with the coalition presence. His military training made him exceptionally dangerous, and his knowledge of coalition tactics had allowed him to successfully defend the compound for 6 months. "What's the maximum range from our closest observation post to the compound's command center?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew why she was being briefed on this situation. "Approximately 2,800 meters, Colonel Henderson replied, "just over 1.5 miles. Elena understood immediately. Following her record-breaking shot, military leadership was considering whether her long-range capabilities might offer a solution to the siege. But this situation was far more complex than her previous mission. Kamar had been a single target in a relatively exposed position. Aziz commanded from within a heavily fortified compound, surrounded by defensive positions and civilian hostages. "Has anyone attempted a precision long-range engagement?" Elena asked. "2 snipers have tried," Major Thompson replied grimly. "Both were experienced operators with confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Both failed to connect at the extended range required to remain outside the compound's defensive perimeter." Elena studied the topographical maps more carefully. The mathematics were challenging but not impossible. The compound was positioned on a rocky plateau, with the command center built into a natural cave system. However, there were several positions where Aziz regularly appeared to coordinate his fighters' activities. "What's the intelligence on Aziz's patterns and routines?" "He's disciplined and cautious," the intelligence officer replied. "But he has a weakness. He insists on personally overseeing defensive preparations every morning at 0700 hours. He appears on a specific balcony carved into the rock face for approximately 3 to 4 minutes. Elena's tactical mind began working through the possibilities. A shot at that distance would require perfect conditions, exceptional ammunition, and skills that few snipers in the world possessed. But it was theoretically possible. "What's the timeline for resolution?" Elena asked. Colonel Henderson's expression grew serious. Washington is losing patience. The siege has been ongoing for 6 months, tying up significant resources and personnel. There's political pressure to either resolve the situation or abandon it entirely. Elena understood the implications. If they abandoned the siege, Aziz and his fighters would claim victory and use it as propaganda to recruit more Taliban fighters throughout the region. The civilian hostages would likely be executed as a final act of defiance. But continuing the siege indefinitely was also unacceptable from both a military and political standpoint. If you're asking whether I can make that shot, Elena said carefully, I need to conduct detailed reconnaissance of the position, environmental conditions, and target patterns. Even then, it would be an extremely challenging engagement with a significant probability of failure. Major Thompson leaned forward. Sergeant Martinez, we're not asking for guarantees. We're asking for your professional assessment of whether this is within the realm of possibility. Elena looked around the room at the faces of experienced officers who had been wrestling with this problem for months. She thought about the civilian hostages who had been trapped in the compound, living in fear for half a year. She thought about the Taliban fighters who would escape to plan more attacks if the siege failed. Give me 48 hours to study the target and conditions, Elena said finally. If I determine the shot is feasible, I'll need complete tactical support and authorization to engage at my discretion. You'll have whatever you need, Colonel Henderson assured her. The next morning, Elena found herself positioned at Observation Post Delta, the closest coalition position to the Taliban compound. Beside her was Staff Sergeant Williams, a veteran spotter who had volunteered for the mission after hearing about Elena's record-breaking shot. Pretty impressive view, Williams commented, settling into position with his spotting scope. Elena was already studying the compound through her rifle's optics. The defensive positions were expertly constructed, taking advantage of natural rock formations to provide maximum protection. Machine gun nests covered all approaches, and sentries moved on unpredictable patterns to avoid presenting consistent targets. There, Williams said, indicating a position on the compound's eastern side. That's where Aziz typically appears. Elena tracked her scope to the indicated location. It was a natural balcony carved into the rock face, approximately 20 feet above the main courtyard. From that position, Aziz could observe his entire defensive perimeter while remaining protected from most angles of attack. Range? Elena asked. Williams consulted his laser rangefinder. 2,790 meters. Call it 1.73 miles. Elena began making detailed notes about environmental conditions. Wind patterns in the valley were complex, with thermals rising from the sun-heated rocks and variable crosswinds at different altitudes. The shot would require accounting for all of these factors across a bullet flight time of nearly 5 seconds. What's your assessment? Williams asked after they had observed the position for several hours. It's possible, Elena replied, but the window will be extremely narrow, maybe 30 seconds maximum before he moves to cover. That afternoon, Elena spent hours at the base's shooting range, fine-tuning her rifle and testing different ammunition loads. She selected match-grade 300 Winchester Magnum rounds specifically designed for extreme long-range accuracy. Every detail had to be perfect. The slightest inconsistency in ammunition could result in a miss by several feet at that distance. As evening approached, Elena joined the intelligence team for a final briefing on Aziz's patterns and routines. Months of observation had revealed that the Taliban commander was methodical in his daily schedule, appearing on the balcony every morning to conduct his defensive briefings. He's always punctual, the intelligence officer confirmed. 700 hours every day for the past 6 months. He spends approximately 3 minutes directing defensive preparations, then moves back into the cave system. Elena nodded, understanding that she would have one opportunity. If she missed, Aziz would likely alter his routines, making future attempts impossible. Worse, a missed shot would reveal the coalition's position and capabilities, potentially resulting in increased pressure on the observation posts. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She found herself on the base's makeshift firing range, practicing dry fire exercises in the darkness. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. 30 civilian hostages, months of coalition effort, and her own reputation all depended on a single trigger pull at an unprecedented distance. Sergeant Williams found her there at midnight. "Can't sleep either?" "Just thinking through the variables," Elena replied. "Wind, humidity, barometric pressure, bullet trajectory. There are so many factors that could affect the shot." Williams settled beside her. "You know what the other operators are saying about you?" Elena shook her head. "They're saying you're either crazy or the best sniper they've ever seen. Most are betting on both." Elena smiled grimly. "What do you think?" "I think tomorrow morning we find out what you're really made of." Dawn approached with the kind of crystalline clarity that snipers dream about. Elena had been in position since 0430 hours, watching the compound through her night vision scope as the first hints of sunlight began to creep across the mountain peaks. The temperature was perfect. Cool enough to eliminate heat shimmer, but not so cold as to affect her equipment's performance. Staff Sergeant Williams lay beside her, constantly monitoring environmental conditions with his array of meteorological instruments. Every few minutes, he provided updated readings that Elena incorporated into her mental calculations. Wind speed, direction, humidity, barometric pressure, all the variables that would determine whether her bullet found its target or sailed harmlessly into the rocky mountainside. 0645, Williams whispered, 15 minutes until showtime. Elena's breathing was controlled and rhythmic. She had entered what snipers called the zone, a state of heightened awareness where every sense was focused on the mission. The weight of her rifle felt familiar and comforting against her shoulder. The scope's optics were crystal clear, revealing every detail of the distant compound. Through her earpiece, she could hear the communications chatter from the various observation posts surrounding the Taliban stronghold. Coalition forces had maintained this siege for 6 months, watching and waiting for an opportunity that had never come. Until now. "All stations, this is Overwatch," came the voice of Major Thompson. "Primary shooter is in position and standing by. Maintain radio discipline and be prepared to provide supporting fire if the situation develops." Elena appreciated the confidence Thompson was showing in her, but she also understood the weight of expectation. If this shot failed, it would likely be the last attempt to resolve the siege through precision means. Political pressure from Washington was mounting, and there was talk of either a costly full-scale assault or abandoning the position entirely. Neither option was acceptable. A full assault would likely result in significant coalition casualties and would almost certainly lead to the execution of the civilian hostages. Abandoning the siege would hand the Taliban a major propaganda victory and allow them to continue using the compound as a base for operations throughout the region. 0655, Williams reported. "Wind is steady from the southwest at 8 knots. Temperature 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity 63%. Elena made final adjustments to her scope, compensating for the environmental conditions. At this distance, even a slight error in calculation could result in a miss by several feet. She had run the ballistic calculations dozens of times, but now she was relying on instinct and training honed through thousands of hours of practice. "Movement in the compound," Williams observed through his spotting scope. "Sentries are changing positions. Looks like they're preparing for the morning briefing." Elena could see the activity through her own optics. Taliban fighters were moving with the practiced efficiency of a well-disciplined force. Malik Aziz had trained his men well during the 6-month siege, and their defensive preparations showed the influence of his military background. 0658, Williams counted down. Target should appear in approximately 2 minutes. Elena's heart rate slowed to match her breathing. This was the calm that had carried her through sniper school, through months of training, and through the record-breaking shot that had first brought her to the attention of Special Operations Command. But this shot would be different. This wasn't just about eliminating a single target. This was about ending a 6-month standoff and proving that precision could triumph where brute force had failed. "I have movement on the balcony," Williams reported quietly. "Multiple figures. Stand by for target identification." Through her scope, Elena could see shapes moving in the shadows of the carved stone balcony. The compound's command position was built into the natural rock formation, providing excellent protection from most angles of attack. But from Elena's position, nearly 3 miles away and elevated above the valley floor, she had a clear line of sight to the target area. 0700 hours, Williams announced. "Target should be appearing, now." A figure stepped onto the balcony, and Elena immediately recognized the profile from countless intelligence photographs. Malik Aziz was a compact, muscular man with the bearing of a professional soldier. Even at this impossible distance, Elena could see the confident way he moved as he began his daily inspection of the defensive positions. "Positive identification," Elena whispered into her microphone. "Target acquired." Through her earpiece, she could hear Major Thompson's voice. "You are cleared to engage at your discretion. Take your time, Sergeant. Make it count." Elena centered her crosshairs on Aziz's chest. Then began the complex calculations that would determine where to actually aim. The bullet would take nearly 5 seconds to reach its target, during which time it would drop significantly due to gravity and drift laterally due to wind. She had to aim not at where Aziz was, but at where he would be when the bullet arrived. "Wind steady at 8 knots, Williams provided continuous updates. "Target is stationary, conducting briefing." Elena could see that Aziz was speaking with several of his subordinates, gesturing toward various defensive positions around the compound. Intelligence had indicated that these morning briefings typically lasted 3 to 4 minutes, providing a small window of opportunity. Through her scope, Elena watched as Aziz pointed toward one of the observation posts, apparently aware of the coalition presence, but confident in his defensive advantages. The Taliban commander had successfully defended this position for 6 months against multiple coalition attempts to dislodge him. He had every reason to feel secure. "Bullet flight time will be 4.8 seconds, Elena calculated aloud, "accounting for wind drift, drop compensation, and target movement." Williams understood immediately. "I'll call the shot when you're ready." Elena's breathing became even more controlled. Her heartbeat slowed to a steady rhythm that wouldn't interfere with her trigger pull. The scope's crosshairs settled into position, not on Aziz's current location, but on the spot where her calculations indicated he would be when the bullet arrived. "Send it," Williams whispered. Elena's finger began the slow, steady pressure on the trigger. At this distance, even the smallest flinch or anticipation could send the bullet wide. Her training had drilled into her the importance of the surprise break, allowing the shot to fire without consciously willing it, preventing any involuntary muscle movement that could affect accuracy. The rifle fired with a sound like controlled thunder, the muzzle blast echoing off the surrounding rocks. Elena absorbed the recoil and immediately settled back onto the target, watching through her scope as her bullet began its impossible journey across nearly 3 miles of mountain air. The bullet's trajectory was invisible, but Elena's training allowed her to track its approximate path. She counted off the seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. At 1004.8, she saw Malik Aziz jerk backward and collapse on the stone balcony. Even at this distance, the impact was unmistakable. The Taliban commander's body crumpled, and chaos erupted among his subordinates. "Target down!" Williams shouted into his microphone. "Confirmed hit! Target is down!" The compound exploded into activity as Taliban fighters ran for defensive positions, unsure where the shot had originated. Several of them knelt beside their fallen commander, but it was clear from their frantic gestures that there was nothing they could do. Elena remained focused on the compound, watching for secondary targets and assessing the tactical situation. Without Aziz's leadership, the Taliban defense was already showing signs of confusion and disorganization. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Martinez," Major Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. "Now let's see how they respond." The response came within minutes. White flags began appearing on several of the defensive positions around the compound. The Taliban fighters, realizing that their commander was dead and that coalition forces possessed capabilities they hadn't anticipated, began surrendering. "Multiple white flags visible," Williams reported. "Looks like they're giving up." Within an hour, coalition forces were able to approach the compound without resistance. The Taliban fighters surrendered en masse, and most importantly, all 30 civilian hostages were found alive and unharmed in the tunnel system beneath the main buildings. Elena remained in her shooting position, providing overwatch as coalition forces secured the area. Through her scope, she watched as medics attended to the hostages and military police processed the surrendering Taliban fighters. The 6-month siege was over. "Sergeant Martinez," Major Thompson's voice came through her earpiece. "You just accomplished something that 6 months of conventional warfare couldn't achieve. How do you feel?" Elena lowered her rifle and looked across the valley at the compound that had defied coalition forces for half a year. The morning sun was now fully illuminating the mountainside, and she could see soldiers moving freely through positions that had been impregnable just hours before. "I feel like we brought those people home, sir." The debriefing that followed was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Senior officers from throughout the coalition command structure wanted to understand exactly how she had accomplished what they called the impossible shot. The technical aspects were analyzed and documented for future training purposes, but Elena found herself more interested in the strategic implications. Colonel Henderson summed up the mission's impact. "Sergeant Martinez, your action didn't just eliminate a high-value target. You ended a siege that was draining resources, rescued 30 civilians, and demonstrated to Taliban forces throughout the region that no position is truly safe from coalition capabilities." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came later, when Elena was approached by Corporal Davidson, the same soldier who had questioned her abilities just weeks earlier. "Sergeant Martinez," Davidson said, his voice filled with respect, "I owe you an apology. What you've accomplished, I've never seen anything like it." Elena nodded acknowledgement, but her response was characteristic. "We're all here to do a job, Corporal. The only thing that matters is bringing everyone home safely." Word of the siege-ending shot spread throughout military circles and eventually reached the international media. Elena found herself featured in newspapers and magazines as the sniper who had accomplished the impossible. Military historians compared her achievements to the legendary marksmen of previous conflicts, but noted that her combination of technical skill and tactical impact was unprecedented. The official record would show that Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez had fired the longest confirmed sniper shot in military history, not once, but twice. Her first shot at 3,410 meters had established the record, and her second shot at 2,790 meters had ended a 6-month siege and rescued 30 civilian hostages. But for Elena, the real victory was simpler. She had proven that skill, determination, and steady nerves could triumph over any obstacle. The doubters who had warned she would break under pressure had been silenced not by words, but by actions that spoke louder than any argument ever could. 6 months later, Elena was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy. The citation specifically noted her exceptional marksmanship under extreme conditions and her role in ending a prolonged siege through precision application of force. As she stood at attention during the awards ceremony, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the shooting ranges of East Los Angeles to the mountains of Afghanistan, every challenge had prepared her for those crucial moments when everything depended on her ability to deliver under the ultimate pressure. The medal was an honor, but Elena's real satisfaction came from a different source. In the audience, she could see Sergeant Williams, Major Thompson, and even Corporal Davidson, soldiers who had witnessed firsthand what she was capable of accomplishing. More importantly, she knew that somewhere in Afghanistan, 30 former hostages were living free because she had been willing to take an impossible shot under impossible circumstances. 30 families had been reunited because precision had triumphed over prolonged siege warfare. After the ceremony, Colonel Henderson approached Elena with news of her next assignment. "Sergeant Martinez, given your unique capabilities, the military is establishing a new special operations unit focused on extreme long-range precision missions. We'd like you to consider leading that unit." Elena smiled as she considered the offer. Leading a unit of elite snipers, training the next generation of marksmen in the techniques and mindset required for impossible shots. It seemed like a natural evolution of her military career. "Sir," Elena replied, "I'd be honored to serve in whatever capacity best serves the mission and brings our people home safely." As Elena walked away from the ceremony, she reflected on the lessons learned during those crucial moments in the mountains. Pressure, she had discovered, wasn't something to be feared or avoided. Properly channeled, pressure could forge ordinary people into extraordinary capabilities. The warnings that she would break under pressure had been wrong in every possible way. Instead of breaking, Elena had discovered that extreme pressure had the power to reveal exactly what someone was truly capable of accomplishing. For a sniper who had spent her entire career preparing for impossible shots under impossible circumstances, pressure wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was a tool to be mastered and employed in service of the mission. Years later, when Elena would train new snipers in the techniques required for extreme long-range shooting, she would always emphasize one crucial point. The most important factor wasn't the rifle, the ammunition, or even the environmental conditions. The most important factor was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've prepared for the impossible and proven capable of achieving it. In the mountains of Afghanistan, facing a target nearly 3 miles away and carrying the weight of 6 months of failed efforts, Elena Martinez had done more than make an impossible shot. She had demonstrated that with proper training, unwavering focus, and the courage to attempt the unprecedented, there really were no limits to what could be accomplished under pressure. The Taliban stronghold that had defied coalition forces for 6 months fell not to massive firepower or overwhelming force, but to a single, perfectly placed bullet fired by a sniper who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. And in that moment, every person who had ever doubted Elena's capabilities learned a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their military careers. Never underestimate what someone can accomplish when they've spent their entire life preparing for the moment when everything depends on their ability to deliver under the ultimate pressure.